Okay, so yesterday we were discussing a shaila that somebody asked Reb Nachman. This that we have a halacha that Shabbos makes Paris nigmar malacha, makes it nigmar malacha to be mechayiv them in Trumas and Maishris. Does that even apply? Does that even work? The Shabbos have the power to do this, even though the Paris weren't ready yet. So the case that it all stemmed from was right after the Mishnah. The Mishnah brings a brisa, Tinoikesh shetamnu te'enim erev Shabbos. So te'enim are figs that are juicy and fresh, and they're going to be eaten as is. So those are nigmar melachim. But they never came into the house. They were not brought yet through the main door into the house, and therefore there's not yet triggered a chiyuv trumas and maishas on them. But they decided, even in the fields, they want to use them for Shabbos. They ended up not using them for Shabbos. So the halacha is, since they decided that they wanted to use it for Shabbos, automatically they become a chiyuv in trumas and maishas. They become tevel, because Shabbos has a koich to do that. And we learned, because it says in the pasuk, the karasal Shabbos einig, anything that one eats on Shabbos automatically is considered the derech kfiyas, the morning. So that was the halacha that was not under dispute. The shaila is, do you stretch it and say that Shabbos has the power to create a gemar malacha, even though the pears aren't ready to be eaten? For instance, you decided that you don't want to eat these te'enim fresh, you want to dry them out, and they're in the process of drying, therefore they're not edible. Normally, these would not have a chiyuv for trumas and maishas until they're completely dried out and ready to be eaten. The question is, if you intend to use them on the Shabbos, you decide to want to eat a half-eaten fig on the a half-dried fig on the Shabbos, will Shabbos have the power to make it considered to be nigmar malachtai, that you are now chayiv in trumas and maishas? That was the question that Rava asked from Reb Nachman, and Reb Nachman said unequivocally, "Arechu b'yadenu shabbos kivas bein b'davar shenigmar malachtai, bein b'davar shaloi nigmar malachtai." Mar Zutra, who was Reb Nachman's son, wanted to bring a raya to his father's psak, and he wanted to bring a raya to his father's psak from our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah relates a story. Oh no, it doesn't relate a story. It tells you one may before Shabbos pick muksa. That means find figs that are half dried, therefore they're not considered yet edible, and of course they're not mechuyev in trumas and maishas. And on erev Shabbos b'shvius, he could say, tomorrow I plan to eat from this bunch of pears. I plan to eat tomorrow. So the halach is, if you do that, it's considered min hamuchin, it's not considered muksa, and you're allowed to eat from it. And the question was, why did the Mishnah pick a case of erev Shabbos and b'shvius? So there's two things. Why is it erev Shabbos, and why was it b'shvius? So the Gemara wants to originally prove that it must be that Shabbos would make even these fruits that are not yet nigmar malachta, Shabbos would automatically make them a chiyuv in meiser. And therefore, if you, before Shabbos, said that I want to eat these tomorrow, you wouldn't be able to eat them tomorrow, because you'd have to be mafresh trumas and maishas, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So it must be that on the reason why the Mishnah happened shvius is because shvius negates the problem of a chiyuv to be mafresh trumas and maishas, because on shvius everything is hefer. That was the attempted raya that Marzutra brought to his father. So the Gemara answered that maybe it's not Shabbos in our Mishnah's case that's creating this kviyos. Maybe, in fact, it's the fact that I designated it. The fact that before Shabbos I said I'm planning to eat this. It's that action that did it. So the question is, so why is this whole thing again on there? Shabbos? Why is the whole thing again Shvius? Anytime a person says I'm going to eat pears that are not completely finished, that creates a kviyos. What does it have anything to do with Shabbos? What does it have anything to do with Shvius? So for that, the Gemara says is as follows. It says in the Mishnah that lechatchila someone is allowed to stand on a muksa on erev Shabbos or Shvius. Why is it telling you that? Because we do want to create a diet that on a Erev Shabbos that was not Shvius, it would be different. L'chatchila you're allowed to do it on the Erev Shabbos of Shvius, and then you can actually eat those pears. But if it was a Shabbos, then if you did that, you wouldn't be able to eat it because you can't be mafresh trumas and maasros, right? However, if you illegally were mafresh trumas and maasros on Shabbos, then in fact you would be able to eat it. So the fact that you cannot be mafresh trumas and maasros on Shabbos, since it's not an issue d'oraisa to do, it's only an issue d'rabbanan to do. And if you do it, it will be considered mesukin. In other words, it's chulun, it's not tevel. Therefore, it will not stop the payers from becoming non-muksa. You might have me say that on the Erev Shabbos, if I designate these payers to be eaten, they still remain muksa. You know why they still remain muksa? Because even though I designated them to be eaten, I still can't eat them on Shabbos. So it should still remain muksa. Because it's not enough that I'm designated to eat them. They're not edible yet, because you won't be able to mafresh from the maasros. Zok the Gemara, since if you violate the Issur D'Rabbanan, and you would be mafresh trumas and maasros anyways, it would be edible on Shabbos. That doesn't stop it. The fact is that there's an Issur D'Rabbanan standing in between you and your payers. That will not make it that it should remain muksa. Correct. It's an Issur D'Rabbanan. That's always muksa. So therefore it won't be muksa. Again, they control it on both ends. Shem ovar v'tiknon musuk. That's how the Gemara ended up. So at this point, we're sort of in a stalemate because we don't have a raya, yes or no, from our Mishnah as to whether or not Shabbos can create a Gemar Malacha, because we're arguing now that it's not Shabbos in our Mishnah that's creating the Gemar Malacha, it's the fact that I specifically said I plan to eat it. So there's no factor of Shabbos at all, so you don't have a raya to what Mar Zutra wanted to bring to his father. Frek the Gemara, this is a problem. You cannot say that the fact that I designated these pairs, the whole premise is mistaken. Because you cannot say that the fact that I designated these pears to be eaten tomorrow, even though they're not royal to be eaten yet, that in itself could make it non-muksa. Why? Let's say I designated a whole bunch of these pears to be eaten, right? On a regular weekday. So I take a whole bunch, but I don't need it all. I put it on the buffet, but it doesn't get eaten. What am I going to do with the leftovers? I'm going to put them right back where I got them from, right back on the roof to continue drying. So, Frank the Gemara, this is a scenario that whatever you leave over, you're going to end up putting back. And we know Rabbi Eliezer said, and it's important to note that our whole Mishnah started with Oid Omer Rabbi Eliezer. This whole discussion is according to Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer himself said, the Omar, he said, the only time you say that when you say I'm planning to eat this, I want to eat this, you declare I'm going to eat it. The only time that creates a kfiyas is if whatever I declared I'm planning to eat will for sure be eaten. It's not going to go back to the pile of non-edibles. But if it's going to go back to the pile of non-edibles, Rabbi Eliezer told us in a different place that that's not koibeya anything l'maisha, because it's not really making it edible, because of right, some of it's going to end up going back. So how could you say in our Mishnah that the reason why it's koibeya l'maisha is because I declared it, declaring these types of fruits, which I'm going to put back the leftovers, that doesn't work according to Rabbi Eliezer. So now the only other reason why there would be a chiyuv for Trumas and Maashros could be because of Shabbos. So we're back to our raya again, because the whole way we avoided the raya is by saying that the Kviyas L'Maasher has nothing to do with Shabbos. It's because I designated these payers. But Rabbi Eliezer holds, even if you designated payers l'achila, if the leftovers are going to go back in the pile, that's not considered a designation that'll be mechayiv to Trumas and Maashros. So let's see Rashi.
How can you confirm whether they went back or not, that it should be relevant to what your declaration is?
Well, the way I can control it is if I'm not eating it, I'm not going to throw it in the garbage. I'll put it back to dry.
Okay, you don't, but somebody else does.
I don't listen. No, it's not. The fact is, this is a scenario where it's possible for it to go back. It's possible for it to go back. We both agree. So since it's possible for it to go back, that means your declaration isn't as definite. Because there's going to be cases where it's impossible to go back, where it becomes definite. And the Gemara is going to illustrate it when the Gemara quotes the Beitzah where Rabbi Eliezer says it. The Rashi says, how could you say that the kviyas in our Mishnah is nothing to do with Shabbos? Rather, it's because I declared I'm planning to eat it. Even if you took a lot of these pears, and he put them in front of him, the max of the it's clearly looking like he's planning to eat all this. He's serving it, right? Nevertheless, if the nature of what he's eating over here is something that you can put back, you can put back the leftovers. Hashmin le Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to quote in a moment, the Beitzah, where Rabbi Eliezer is quite clearly the loy kava v'netila kamaisa. The chol again. That's even if I went and if I actually took the pears and actually put them on my table, even that's not a kviyas. So kol in our case, where all he did was he mentioned before Shabbos that he's planning to take from these pears tomorrow. The chol b'dibura b'loy ma'aseh lo mitzvah. Madich, if he actually made a kviyas mamish and he actually served it up, zok Rabbi Eliezer, that's not considered. Zok Rabbi Eliezer, that's not considered a kviyas. Here, I didn't even do that much. I just mentioned that I'm planning to use it tomorrow. I didn't even touch it yet. Surely, such a diver cannot make a kviyas. So we're going back to the svara that in our Mishnah, the kviyas must have happened because of the Shabbos. Where did Rabbi Eliezer say this? It's none. Hanoitel zeisim min matan. Matan Rashi says is a big keli where you store the olives before you take them to the press. You let them get warm and you let them soak in the oil a little bit. That loosens everything up. It's easier to extract the oil after they went through the matan treatment. I'm sorry? Marinating?
Marinating in the vat.
Right. In their own juices. Right? So the halacha is, since there's no gemar malacha, because the gemar malacha by oil, by zeisim is where you have the oil, you're not there yet. So therefore, toivel achas b'melech v'oichel. You can take one olive at a time, dip it in salt, and you're allowed to eat it. In other words, you're allowed to eat it derech arai. What if you took 10 olives at a time, then chayiv, then it's already going to be chayiv in ma'aser. Why? Why? Because that's already more of a kvish. You're taking 10 olives. But Rabbi Eliezer Omer, it depends. Minamaitin tahar chayiv. If the container, the vat where these olives was tahar, then when you took those 10, you're going to be mechayiv them in ma'aser. Minamaitin tamei, but if all the olives in the vat were tamei anyway, then potter, it won't be mechayiv in ma'aser. You know why? Now, this doesn't make sense. What in the world, whether or not a tummy has anything to do with anything? So your frowns on your face, it makes sense. But as the Gemara unfolds, it'll become clear. Because if the maitin is tummy, he'll put back the extras, but if not, he won't. Why? What does that do with anything? We asked, why is it that if it's a tahar vat, he won't put it back, and if it's a tummy vat, he will put it back? Because the guy was tummy. So therefore, if I'm tummy and I take some olives out of there, I'm not putting anything back. Because if I put it back, it's going to cause that I can't eat anything. Now, you have to be very clear. If I took the olives out, didn't I touch the vat and make them tummy right then? Zokt Rashi, no, I didn't. I only made tummy what I actually touched. So technically, if I took some olives out, yes, the area, the surface that I touched will be tummy. So scoop those out, the rest of the vat will become tahar. However, if I take olives and I put them back, they'll get mixed in with the rest of the mush. So they're not metama anything, but they're mixed in. How am I going to pull them out? I can't extract them. So you ask me, why would someone touch it with his hand? It's a very good question. I'm asked that question at home all the time. They take with their hand? Okay, there you got it. Okay, so Amr Bavo, Reisha b'matan Torah v'gaver tamei. Therefore, he's definitely not going to put any olives back. So now you have an example of why you would never put it back, right? Seifa b'maitin tamei v'gaver tamei. There, everyone's tummy. The matzim hadalei. So since I took 10 olives, but I could easily put back my leftovers I'm not eating, it's not Zok Rabbi Eliezer only. That's not going to be kavayit l'inyan ma'asers. So once I have that, Zok Gemara, but the Masnisa Nami. So say our Mishnah also is speaking by Muksa Tahar, the Gaver Tamei, the Loy Matzim Hadalei. So maybe our Mishnah is referring to the same case. You want to say our Mishnah can't be speaking. You want to say our Mishnah cannot be speaking in a case where the kaviyas is because I designated it because I can put it back. Maybe the Mishnah is also speaking in a case where I can't put it back. So now we're making more of a nukimt in the Mishnah. This muksa that they were talking about was a muksa that was tar and the person was tummy. It's not. It doesn't say that mufurish in the Mishnah, but that's how, if you want to play that the Mishnah is speaking in such an unusual case, that doesn't make sense. Because in our Mishnah's case, you never touched these. You just went before Shabbos and started planning to take them. So I was for sure, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the reason why in our Mishnah that these pairs are hukshel kabel tuma, and therefore they're mechuyev in maasros, I'm sorry, Huksher L'Kabbalah has nothing to do with this. The reason why the Huksher to be Mechayiv you in Trumas and Maestris is because of Shabbos. Because if it's because I designated them to be eaten, they're Mukhsar and Va'im. Ella, Amar Absimi Barashi, Zok Absimi Barashi, Rabbi Lezer Karmat. Let's not forget, all of this discussion is only about Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Lezer Latamei, the Amar Truma Kava V'Choshkin Shabbos. So Rabbi Simi Barashi is going to go back. You're right. We can't use this theory that the reason why in our Mishnah the Paris are hooksup and they're mechuyev and trumas and maishus. If it wasn't for the fact that it's Shvius, it has to be because of Shabbos. By Beitzah, you have a beautiful raya that Shabbos is kaveya, even though it's Paris that are not right to be eaten, that we're not so fast. It's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer in general allows many more things to be considered hukser, so that they're mechuyev and trumas and maishus than the norm, the people who argue on it. And Rabbi Nachman is trying to prove that according to everybody, Shabbos is kaveya. Just because you prove that according to Rabbi Eliezer, Shabbos is kaveya, that doesn't mean that's a mainstream svara. Why? Because Rabbi Eliezer holds that all payers can become huksher, can become hukva, that they're mechuyev and maishus much easier. What does that mean? Rabbi Eliezer even holds that, let's say you went to the Gairin and there was no Gemar Malacha and there was no chiv to take trumas and maishus, but you were mafish truma, automatically becomes tevel, and you mechuyev to mafish maishus. What's the shaykhus? But since Rabbi Eliezer holds that even something like being mafish truma will create a chiv for maishus, kol shekain Shabbos, surely designating something for achila Shabbos would also make it, even though it's not ready to be eaten, it would make it nigmar malachta to mechuyev and maishus. But we need a raya that the mainstream holds like that as well, and we don't have a raya. Did none. Perish at Tarmon, if you took truma from Paris actually nigmar malachtim, so you went out into the field before it was nigmar malachtim, and you were mafish only truma. Rabbi Eliezer oiser lechal mein arai. Rabbi Eliezer says you may no longer eat arai because now it's hooked for lamaisher. Well, so now we've diffused the raya. There's no raya from our Mishnah that at least according to the mainstream Shabbos can be kaveya. So Tashmami Sefer. Let's try the Sefer. The Sefer of our very Mishnah is the Chachamim arguing on Rabbi Eliezer. What's the machlokes? Why did the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Eliezer? They said you can't just say I'm going to eat from this pile. You actually have to designate exactly which pairs from the pile you're planning to eat. Why do they say that? The Chachamim, Rashi told us, because they don't hold a brera. You have to identify the specific pairs that you're going to eat. But in every other way, the Chachamim agree to Rabbi Eliezer. No, so now you have a raya that the Chachamim we already proved that you have a raya from our Mishnah that Shabbos is kaveya. You wanted to fluff it off that is Rabbi Eliezer, but you did not forget that the Chachamim also says the same halacha. No, the Chachamim actually Yerushan. So you see clearly So once again, I'm going to just repeat exactly the same raya we had in Rabbi Eliezer, but you fluffed it off to Rabbi Eliezer. Time of the Erev Shabbos b'shvi the lav bari surihu. The only reason why you're allowed to eat it the next day on Shabbos is because there's no chiv tumas and maishris, because it's hefker, because the Mishnah tells us we're speaking about on the Shemitah year. Habashar shnei shavua the bnei yisurin in every other year where there would be a chiv of tumas and maishris, asurim they would be ushered to eat al tevel. Why would they be ushered to eat al tevel? My time alav mishum the Shabbos cover. So now we have a raya again. So tomorrow law you still don't have a raya. Shiny hasam even the amar mikan that kan and the oichel lemachar. Since I was much more specific, I didn't just stop saying I'm going to take pairs. I actually identified the specific pairs that I'm going to eat. Kavalei, that creates a kriyas. Frank the Gemara, which is the same deflection that the Gemara tried using in Rabbi Eliezer. Frank the Gemara, ihachi, ma'ir yishabas afilu b'char mami. So the Gemara, hakamash malam, the same halach we said yesterday, the tevel muchan hu eichel Shabbos, shim over v'tiklim esukim. That the Mishnah says the case specifically on the Mishnah says the case specifically on Erev Shvius, on the case where Shemitah Peresha wasn't Mechuyev and Maishris, and that's where the Mishnah is like Chili, you can do it and eat it. But on Shabbos, you can't do it with Chili and eat it because it would be usher because of Trumas and Maishris. But if you were Mavish Trumas and Maishris, illegally, Avada, it would no longer be Muktzah. Exactly like we had before. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm happy you brought it up. How come the Gemara didn't ask the same question here? Because the Chachamim don't say that. They hold even if you put it back, it's still hooked. It was only Rabbi Eliezer Shita that if you put it back. So that's exactly what Shlomi just spoke out. The Gemara Rashi speaks that out the Farish. So let's look at Rashi. Let's look at Rashi. The Tevel Muchnu So I'm looking at the first widest line of Rashi, Kida Precious, the Hacha, the last word on the line, exactly what Shlomi spoke out. According to Rabbanan, who argues on this halacha that Rabbi Eliezer said. And he said, even if you're going to be putting it back, it's still kaveh once you took it out. Beautiful. Urimini. Now we're finished this sugya of whether or not Shabbos is kaveh, and now we're going to ask a stira from Rabbi Eliezer on Rabbi Eliezer. So, break the Gemara. If you were eating an eshkol, so that's definitely not kvish. Normally, you're not walking around with a cluster of grapes to eat it. That's not called liquor. Normally, your grapes are either wine already or they're in a bowl. If it's in an eshkol, that's a clear sign that there is no kvish yet. As Rashi says, so you're eating here without the gemar malacha. The nichnas migina lachatz. You walk from the gina into the chachim. Now, if you remember, the gina is something that's not your main house. That wouldn't be teveya. But your chater, which is your front yard, which is just like your house, that's called that you brought it into your house. If it's in your chater, it's considered like you brought it into your house. So now you brought it into your house. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yigmar, you're allowed to continue eating even though you brought it into your house. Rabbi Yeshua Omer lo Yigmar, you're not allowed to finish. What if we're not talking about a case where you came into the chatzor? Rather, you're eating this and suddenly it became Shabbos. So now the question is, will Shabbos be koveya to be machayv in ma'asros? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yigmar. Rabbi Eliezer says you can finish eating it, which means Shabbos will not koveya to ma'asros. So in our Mishnah, we had proven that Rabbi Eliezer holds that Shabbos is koveya in ma'asros. Yet here, Rabbi Eliezer clearly said that even though Shabbos arrived and you're eating the grapes, it's not koveya in ma'asros. And Rabbi Yeshua Omer lo Yigmar. So effectively, you have a stira, this Rabbi Eliezer, who says that Shabbos has no impact, and our Mishnah, which we've proven that Shabbos does have an impact. So tomorrow it's different over there. Hasam k'dekantani taima. Rabbi Nosson explained the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, and he said, like Yisham Rabbi Eliezer Yigmar, the chatzar Yigmar. He didn't mean that you could remain in the chatzar and you can continue eating these pears. You have to leave the chatzar, and then you can finish eating, but you can't eat it in the chatzar. You were in, and you have to stop eating and then go out.
Shabbos is the issue.
Well, there's two cases here, right? The first case was the chatzar, and now we're going to discuss the Shabbos case. The Shabbos, you're not allowed to finish eating it on Shabbos. You have to eat it after Shabbos. So let's see Rashi. Rav Nosson Omer, it's a longish Rashi. It's halfway down in the super wide lines. And the same thing by Shabbos, you must leave. You must wait till after Shabbos till you can finish. All of Rav Nosson's comments are on the psak of Rabbi Eliezer. The Israel Rabbi Eliezer Shabbos cover. We've already established Rabbi Eliezer holds Shabbos will be kaveya, even mechayiv and trumas and even though there's no gemar melacha. Umiu, where did Rabbi Eliezer say you're allowed to finish eating it? Is l'moitzai Shabbos yigmar. The loydami l'tinoike shetam l'teinim. Frank Rashi, I don't understand. You can undo it once it's. If you're saying that Shabbos makes it usher, right? It makes it hook for the meiser. How does that suddenly disappear if you wait until after Shabbos? So it's Rashi, and Rashi asks from a case, the very first case in the Mishnah that this all started from, where we illustrated the concept that Shabbos is kaveya, were these children who took figs, which were nigmar malachtan, and they buried them in the field to save them for Shabbos. They designated them for Shabbos. The Mishnah Brisa that we quoted right after the Gemara says, even after Shabbos you can't eat them until you are mafish trumas and maishus. Yet here we're saying that after Shabbos you could eat them without being mafish trumas and maishus. What's the difference? So Rashi is like dami l'tinoike shetam l'teinim. The Tnan below ill, we learned earlier, Shabbos lo yoichu, that you can't even eat them after Shabbos because now you have to be mafish trumas and maishus. So Rashi, there's a difference there. The Hasam lachila Shabbos yichtum. There you specifically said, I want to use this for Shabbos. When you specifically state this is Achila Shabbos, then then it becomes permanent Nigmar Malachton, and even after Shabbos, it's still Nigmar Malachton, and you still have to be Mafish Shum Shemaitis. Avozula Yichtib the Shabbos. When he's walking around with the cluster of grapes and Shabbos arrived, he didn't declare, I want to eat this on Shabbos. He happened to be eating on Shabbos. And therefore, only for Shabbos will it be Usr, but it will not be Hukfa, the Maishris, after Shabbos. Rashi does not only say this here, he actually says it on Amud Beis as well when he introduces the cases. Oh, developed. So now it's no longer a stira in Rebbe Eliezer. Okay, now it's going to get much easier. We're not going to have the complicated situation with the Mishnah. So now we're going to get into an easy Gemara. He also Rabin Rabbi Yochanan. When Rabin came, he said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So now we're taking a step back and we're rounding up the sugya and we're taking all the pieces and putting them together. Echad Shabbos. Shabbos has the effect of being able to be convey something, to be mechayiv and meisrus, as we illustrated here. The Echad Truma. If you're mafish Truma, it also has the ability to say that it's nigmar malachta and now you're mechayiv and meisrus. Again, we illustrated that earlier with saying that Rabbi Eliezer is the one who's makel or he's machamer, and he says the mafish Truma will actually cause this to happen. The Echad Chatzar, not only bringing it into your house is kaveyet l'maishes, even into your yard will be kaveyet l'maishes. The Echad Meta, or if you sell this or buy this, that also gives it a cheshivas and gives it a kfiyas to trigger the chiyuv trumas l'maishes. So kulam ain't kavin. All these items they don't work. Ela b'davar should nigmar malachta. So they are kaveh. All of them will be kaveh l'maishes, but only if it was nigmar malachta. So if something was nigmar malachta, but it wasn't brought into your house yet, Shabbos will trigger it. Truma will trigger it. Chatzar, even if it didn't come to your house, it only came into your chatzar, it'll trigger it. And if there's a sale done with it, it'll trigger it. But that's only if it's nigmar malachta. So now we're going to go through the 4 items that Rabbi Yochanan listed off do create a trigger, but when it's nigmar malachta, and show that there's a argument on each 4 of these. Rabbi Yochanan happened told that they work, but there's an argument about all 4 of these. Contrary, correct. Because Rav Nachman said it's contrary to Rav Nachman. So I'm happy you brought it up at exactly the right time. Why? Because what does the Gemara say a moment ago? Shabbos is lafukim the hill. Shabbos is to say that we don't hold like hill. So who's hill? We just learned that Rabbi Eliezer holds that Shabbos is kaveya l'maiser, right? Sai if it's roy, sai if it's not roy. So why are we kriching to find a hill who argues? In our sugya, we have somebody right here who argues. So Rashi Tosfos asked that kasha. That's the last Tosfos, and he said it's not such a big chiddush that we don't pass like Rabbi Eliezer because he was a shamuti anyway. We don't pass like him. But to say that it argues a hill who normally pass like, that's already a significant fact. So Shabbos lafukim the hill. The Tanya, Amr Paris Mimakam Lamakim Liktois, you're moving pairs around, and the reason why you're moving them is because you want, there's no Gemar Malach yet, because you want them to dry. Liktois means you're going to let them dry. And the Kiddush Alayim Ayoim, and it became Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda said, Hillel Atve Oisher. Hillel is a Shitas Yochid, and only he holds that Shabbos makes it usher, which means Shabbos is Kaveh, these pairs Lamaishers, even though these pairs are not edible yet, right? They're still in the process of drying. So here's where you see Hillel holds that even when they're in the middle of drying, which Hillel will be consistent with what Rav Nachman said. But Rabbi Yochanan argues on that. Chatzar, what about the case of Chatzar? The case of Chatzar, that the Chatzar's Kaveya is not like Rabbi Yaakov. Now we didn't have anybody in our sugi yet introduced who held that a Chatzar is not Kaveya, but we have Rabbi Yaakov. If you were moving Ta'anim around, but you're not ready to eat yet because you're drying them. And Banav uvnei Veisai, Oichlin mehen Arai, his children are allowed to eat Arai, upetur min ha'maiser, they'll be part of a maiser. The Tanya law that Rabbi Yaakov mechayiv. Rabbi Yaakov holds that even if they're not ready to be eaten, the Chatzar will still be mechayiv them in Trumas ha'maisers. Yet Rabbi Yochanan said that if they're not ready to be eaten, the Chatzar will not create a chiyuv Trumas ha'maisers. Rabbi Yosy by Yehuda Poiter. Truma, who's arguing on Truma? Rabbi Yochanan said Truma, if you're mafish Truma on payers, even though there's no Gemar Malacha, only if you're mafish Truma, even though you didn't bring it into your house yet, but there was a Gemar Malacha, then it would be Kavet L'maishers, but if there's no Gemar Malacha, it wouldn't. That's Lafukim with Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanan we learned, Peir Shatarman Achla Nigmar Malachtan, which was the Beitzah that we quoted earlier. And here it doesn't say Lafukim with the hill, because there is no hill that argues. So we're stuck with saying that the only one who disagrees with this is Rabbi Eliezer. Peir Shatarman Achla Nigmar Malachtan, Rabbi Eliezer Oiser Lechom and Arai, because he holds Truma creates a Chiv Trumas Ha'maishes, even if it was not Nigmar Malachtan. The Chacham Matir and the Chacham Matir. Because the Chacham hold like Rabbi Yochanan who holds that since it was not nigmar malachton, the fact that you were mafresh truma doesn't have an impact. Mekach, where do you see purchasing something creates a kvius? Like kayach te'enim me'am aretz. If one buys figs from an am aretz, b'makam sheroy b'nei adam darsin, in a place where most people don't eat the figs fresh, rather they dry them out. So, in other words, this is not yet royal. You're allowed to eat aray uma asrin demai, and you have to take when it is nigmer malachton, you're going to have to be mafresh maishus from them, but demai because you bought it from an amoritz. Zok Gemara shemami not klas. From this halacha that we just quoted, we can actually extract three separate halachas. A shemami not mekach eina kavas ela b'davar shenigmer malachton. Here you purchased it from the amoritz. So if you purchase it from the amoritz, then you should say that that's kaveya, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to eat it before your mafresh trumas and maishus. But here the Beitzah tells us that you could eat oichel benar. You're allowed to eat aray. Why? Because it was not nigmar malachtoi. Even though you bought it and it gives it a significance, but it's not nigmar malachtoi. Buying something that's not nigmar malachtoi will not be kaveya. So that's what's relevant to our discussion. But there's other things we learned from this Beitzah. You also learn that roiv amer tzarash, which is generally what we have, that there's only a chiyuv, it's only a chumud rabbanon, the chiyuv of demai. And Rashi says, where do you see roiv amer tzarash? Midazlinin l'kulo. Since we make them, the kamrin ma'ashrim demai. We don't say you have to be ma'ashrim. Mamish have to be ma'ashrim them. There's a real chiyuv because really we assume that they were mafresh trumas and maishus. So the chumer ba'almihi, the kind that you have to take maishus from the bay is really a chumer ba'alma, the achmer lafrusha misveka shar maishus shenech shedu alem. But really, roiv amayarts are maser, and the shmamina masrin demai me'amaretz afilu b'davar shel nigmar malachta. Let's think about this. Normally, if it's nigmar malachta, we're choshit maybe the amaretz wasn't mafresh trumas and maishus. Here, the chiyuv trumas and maishus wasn't even chal yet because they're not fully dried, and we said normal people are going to only be mafresh trumas and maishus when they're fully dried. Yet still here, we're choshit that maybe they did take trumas and maishus. So you see from here that even though most people do not mafresh trumas and maishus before the gemar malacha, when it comes to these figs, we even suggest that maybe they were ma'aser them before. And let's just look at Rashi. We learned a moment ago the Rashi roiv amayot ma'ashrim. If you go 3 lines above that Rashi is the kasaver haitana. This Tana holds yesh shema'ashrim kaiduk maralacha. There are those who don't wait until they're fully dry and they'll take off the trumas and maishus anyway. Umida hanay hegasi. There are a significant amount of people who do that, and therefore b'telinin be'lakula, and therefore it's only a suffix. And we don't know if they took, we don't know if they didn't, so it's mashim demai. Now we have a new thing. The Lafuki is going back to what Rabbi Yochanan said earlier. Rabbi Yochanan said earlier that a mekach is not keveya only by a davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi. It's only keveya if it's nigmar malachtoi. Rabbi Yochanan is arguing on the following Beitzah. It says a machl of pears im chaveroi zelachol v'zelachol. You have apples and I have peaches, and I want to trade with you. So if you swap, which is essentially a sale, it's a barter, or zel liktis for zel liktis, you're going to dry the fruit that I give you, and I'm going to dry the fruit that I give you, meaning it's not yet nigmar malachta, or zel lachav zel liktis, or I'm going to eat and you're going to dry. It doesn't matter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lechel chayiv liktis pater. Rabbi Kiva said that if you bought it, first you just chayiv, no matter what you're chayiv. So you see, even if it's not nigmar malachtai, the fact that there was a sale or a barter done triggers a chiyuv for trumas and maishus. If you don't remember lecha chayiv liktis pater, Rabbi Yehuda holds the no, only if it's nigmar malachtan, but if it's not nigmar malachtan, that wouldn't work. So this is the exact shaila that Rabbi Yochanan took a stand on, and he said that unless it was nigmar malachtan, the fact that there was a sale done will not trigger a chiyuv trumas and maishus.
You have a riot that a promoter is an amor.
Maybe Baruch Hashem, we were zeicher to finish Hamevi, which is the 4th paragraph. Okay, now we're going to get into language. We're going to discuss language. How many words can you think of that describe an action of lowering someone down through a trapdoor or lowering someone down to a skylight. In English, the word for it is lowering down, right? But we're going to see there's a whole bunch of Hebrew terms for this same word. Mashilin Paris derech aruba b'yom. If you have Paris on the roof, they're drying, and you see it's going to rain soon, so you don't want them to get soaked with the rain. We're trying to dry them out, so you want to get them inside your house. So if there's a skylight in your house, which means that you're not going to have to lift the Paris up to put it in somewhere, you're just using gravity to lower it down, you're allowed to do that on Yom Tov. Avaloi b'Shabbos, but you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. Gewaltig. Gewaltig. And Rashi makes it very clear, no, because it's a tircha. It's a tircha. So we only allow you to lower it down into the skylight. It's a weight. You're lowering something down. But if let's say, sometimes on buildings there's a raised little hut on the roof of a building because a staircase goes up to the roof, right? So imagine if in that little hut there was a window and you wanted to lower it down through the window, that you wouldn't be able to do, because then you have to lift the Paris up from the ground and then lower it down. That's harder. It's easier just to push it over to the trapdoor and lower it in. So we're only allowing you to lower it in to a hole that's on the surface on the floor. But if you have to lift it up to put it in the window, then it wouldn't be allowed. If you have Paris that are going to get wet, you're allowed to cover them over with kalim so they shouldn't get wet. You're also allowed to cover over jugs of wine or oil that will get ruined in the rain. You're allowed to cover them. And if you have something dripping and you don't want it to make a mess in your house, for instance, your roof is leaking, and you'll say, okay, right after Shabbos, I'll talk Chaim Tzvi. But what am I going to do until then? So you're allowed to put a bucket underneath to capture that rain, not to mess up your house. Zok to Gemara. No, we're talking about a skylight. So you're talking about because there's a little curve around it.
They didn't have the curve. I'll ask for something else. If it's only because of tircha, then the halacha would be dependent on how much fruit you have on the roof.
Beautiful. The Gemara is going to get that. Beautiful. The Gemara is going to get that. Excellent. Shouldn't it impact how much there is, right? So one apple, it's easier to lift it up and put it through a window than it is to lower through a trapdoor 5,000 pounds of watermelon, right? So all that is relevant. So let's see. Amar Rav Yehuda Rav Nosson. Chatani Meshilin. One used the word Meshilin as the first word of our Mishnah. Chatami Mashchilin, and someone else used the word Mashchilin. Amar Zutra. Mandatani Meshilin Lamishtabish. Umandatani Mashchilin Lamishtabish. No matter which word you use to lower, to describe that action of lowering something down, it's a legitimate word. Mandatani Mashilin Lamishtabish Tachsiv Ki Yishal Zeisecha. When your pears fall off the tree. So you see Yishal means to fall, to lower down, to fall down. The Tanan, because there's a mission that says there's two types of mumen discussed: the shachal and the kasel. What is the shachal? The leg, the thigh slipped out of the hip. So you see, again, it means shachal also means to fall down. One of his hips is higher than the other one. So you see, shachal means to fall. It's not just those two words. Manditani mashirin laimishtabish, umanditani mashchirin laimishtabish, umanditani manshirin laimishtabish, umanditani mashirin laimishtabish. So these four words also mean going down. Tetnan Rabbi Shmuel Omer. So on the elevators, you have to, instead of some elevators, they say going down. You say mashchilin, mashirin, or whatever other word you want to use for it. So Tetnan Rabbi Shmuel Omer. Nazir lo yichav roishe be'adama. A nazir shouldn't rub his head on the ground if he's itchy, because that would cause hair to go out. And we know a nazir is not allowed to cut their hair. So you see that the word mashirin could also mean to fall out, fall down. These are two types of kalim that are used to cut hair. Shachar is a sar. It's something that you cut hair with. It's like a knife, a shaving knife, a razor. So al shem shemashkir as a sar. It makes the hair black. I'm not sure what that means, but it makes your hair. Mashkir here means to fall out. It takes your hair off and makes it fall out. So mashkir doesn't mean it makes it black. It means it makes the hair fall out. Then we have So even though the two halves of the scissor have separated from one another, to me they're still considered kelim on their own. What if your clothing got all wet? Mahalach ben, you're allowed to continue walking and they'll dry as you walk in these wet begadim. Rashi says you're not concerned that somebody will say, hey, you washed your clothes on Shabbos. Inami, another place where you see that it means falling out, it's none. What is leket? Something that falls out of your bundle while you're cutting it. So you see all these different expressions all work to describe the act of lowering something down. So now we learn. You're allowed to lower pairs down the window on Yom Tov. At kama, exactly Chaim T's question. How many pairs are we talking about? Let's compare it to a different case that was discussed leaning Shabbos. We know our mission is only speaking leaning Yom Tov. Our mission is very specific. Dafka Yom Tov, not Shabbos. But we're going to prove it from a case that is discussed in Shabbos. And it says as follows: what happens if you have a little shed that's full of hay, and you get guests, or you get talmidim who come and you want to say a shir for them, but there's no room for everybody to fit in. So therefore, mefanin arbe v'chamesh kupa shel teven v'shel tfua b'pnei archim. If you have guests coming, you're allowed to move out of that room 4 or 5 boxes of teven or tfua to make place for them to come in there. Or if you want to say a shir and there's not enough room for people, then you're allowed to clear out. It doesn't mean shir, it means people coming to learn. There's no room. You're allowed to clear out some of these bales or boxes to make room. So this is the number, 4 or 5. That's where you see a number that's allowed, which wouldn't be too much there. Zok Gemara, what's derived from there? The Dilma Shiny Hasam, Dikabital Bismedish. There's a very serious reason. There's either Achos Ocham or Bital Bismedish. There's a serious reason why we should allow so much. I will hawk over here for your personal benefit. The Lekabital Bismedish loy, even though it's jumped, but maybe you wouldn't allow you to schlep so much. Inami, Hasam Hanutaima, the Arba of the Chamish Kupa Shari, Mishum Shabbos. Maybe on Shabbos we allow more of a leniency. Why? The Chamir Zuzulebe. We had this word before that maybe there's no Gzer of Muksa on Shabbos, but there is a Gzer of Muksa on Yom Tov. Because for Shabbos, we don't have to enforce it. Shabbos is very serious by people. About Yom Tov to kill, the Ba'asil is Zuzulebe, Klal Klaloi. Maybe you're not allowed to take anything out. So, Avad, our Mishnah says you could, but if you only look at the Mishnah in Shabbos, how could you apply that to Yom Tov? Maybe on Yom Tov wouldn't be allowed. Inami, le'idachis, or you can look at it a different way. Hasamani Taima, the Leka Hafsid Mammon. Maybe over there, the reason why we limit it to 4 or 5 is because there's no loss of money. Here you're losing your stuff. If it rains on the roof, to mess your stuff up. Afilu Tuvanami, maybe you should even be allowed to move around more things. Zok to Gemara. Hasam Tanan. There we learned. We have a couple of extra minutes, so now I'll push on. Hasam Tanan. There we learned. Avaloy Esa Eitz. So this is a new shaila. What does it mean, loy Esa Eitz? No, we don't.
No answer.
That's right. We don't have a clear answer as to what the amount is. I guess I'll have to look up in the halacha how much is allowed. Okay. Hasam Tanan. Avaloy Esa Eitz. What does that mean? Gomer Shmuel my Avaloy Esa Eitz. It means Avaloy Yigmar is Kala Eitz Kula. That brisa that we just quoted on Shabbos, you're allowed to take out some boxes of payers. Don't clear out the room completely. Because if you clear out the room completely, you know what's going to become noticeable? The floor. And the floor might have bumps in it that you're going to want to smooth out so that your guests should come into a nice floor. And when you smooth out the floor of a place, that's binyan and it's an Isser Deraisa. So therefore, make sure that there's still stuff on the floor so that it won't be so noticeable. It's like if you have a stain on your carpet, you make sure to put your coffee table over it so it won't be noticed. I'm sorry? It's not. Every floor, you're not allowed to be ashvir gumas. But here you have a situation where you had a floor that was piled up in boxes. And on Shabbos, you uncover it. So you might find that the floor is uneven.
You're not allowed to move your table on top. You're not allowed to move your carpet on top. Because you might find
so the halachas of ashvir gumas don't apply on a hard surface floor. It only applies if you have an earthen floor. So in my house, I have a hard surface floor.
People had earthen floors, but it wasn't fully covered.
Oh, Rav Shimon holds you're allowed to because it's the davar shein machaven, right? So you're allowed to move your table if you're not intentionally trying to smooth it out. But if there's a gash in the floor and you have guests and your wife says, I'm so embarrassed. So and so is coming over. We have holes in our floor. So you'll give it a smooth out.
Just short. If you have an earthen floor, right, in the Gemara's time, you're not allowed to take your table out because you might find a gumo.
You're not allowed to uncover your floor. Let's say your floor was completely covered with something. You're not allowed to uncover it because you might.
Also, he says it's cooler. I guess if the
So Rashi says, well, let's look at Rashi. Well, Legalo says a rispa. You're not allowed to uncover the floor. It's interesting to note, even if you have a hard surface floor in the olden days, you're also not allowed to. You're also not allowed to do things like rub on the floor because it's a shvui gumish. You have a hard floor, so the halacha is if most of the floors in your city are hard floors. We live in an urban area. Everybody has wooden floors or some type of hard surface. Then there's no issue. But if you live in a village, in a rural area, in a village where most people have earthen floors, even if you have a hard floor, it's still also outside zera that somebody else might do it. So where it's negeya is a patio. Most people have grass on the outside. So if I have a concrete deck or like a patio, a concrete area, am I allowed to sweep that on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, on Shabbos or Yom Tov? I'm not sure if you're allowed to, because Pashtus, most people have regular backyards. They don't necessarily have a big concrete patio. So there, you'd have to ask your local Orthodox rabbi if you'd be allowed to sweep your driveway. I'm sorry? Right, so since most people have soft floors, since most people have soft floors, and you happen to have a patio, that might be a shayla. It might be a shayla. You'd have to ask. The driveway is not a good example because everybody has hard driveways. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says. Hachamai, what would be the halacha over here on the roof? Are you allowed to clear everything off the roof? So Gemara, Hasamhu b'Shabbos to Aser. Why is it? Maybe I might argue why on Shabbos can't you clear out the whole thing? Mishum dechamer. The Shabbos is more chamer. About Yom Tov to kill Shabbos. Maybe on Yom Tov you would be able to clear everything out. Oidilma hasam diko bitl bes medrash amrit loy there. Even when there's a reason why you want to clear everything out, there's a bitl bes medrash, and that still wasn't good enough of a reason to allow you to clear the whole thing out. Hacha deleka bitl bes medrash. In our case, where you don't even have that factor, loy kol shekain, surely it shouldn't be allowed to clear everything out. So again, we don't have a clarity in exactly how much is too much, and if you're allowed to clear it all out. But we'll stop here and we'll be mamshich tomorrow.
Clearing off the roof is an issue. You might need to find a crack you want to fix.
Yeah, thank you.
You brought up the issue.
That was the shaila.